Part 1, expanded, 700 words. Snow drifted across the endless plains in soft white ribbons, the kind that made the whole world feel muted, as if someone had laid a cold hand over the land and whispered it into stillness. Luke Hargrave stepped out onto his porch, boots creaking against the old wooden boards, the wind tugging at the edges of his coat. Christmas Eve used to mean warmth, his wife's cinnamon bread cooling on the counter, the soft glow of lanterns she hung on the rafters, laughter echoing through their small ranch house. Now it was just him, a man made older by grief, standing in the quiet with nothing but the restless cattle and the memory of better years. He rubbed his hands together, trying to chase away the chill that had seeped deeper than bone. Winter had been unforgiving this year, colder than most, and though he'd handled worse, the silence was what cut the sharpest. Since Anna passed 3 winters ago, the ranch had settled into a hollow rhythm: work, eat, sleep, repeat. There were nights he swore he still heard her humming in the kitchen or felt the impression of her head on the pillow beside him. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, the emptiness pressed harder than usual. Luke turned toward the door, ready to retreat into the warmth of the fire, when a faint sound pricked through the wind. A knock, soft, barely there, so gentle it would have gone unheard by anyone not standing in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. He froze. Out here, miles from town, no one knocked on his door without reason. Most folks sent letters or came by wagon if they truly needed something. But a knock, timid, almost afraid, that was something else. He opened the door carefully, lantern light spilling across the snow like a warm spill of honey. And there she was. A young woman stood on the porch, her entire body trembling beneath a thin cotton shawl soaked through with melting snow. Her dress was worn, the hem frayed, boots cracked and barely holding together. Snowflakes clung to her lashes like tiny crystals, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. But what struck Luke most wasn't her appearance, it was her eyes. Wide, exhausted, a little frightened, but steady in a way that spoke of someone who had seen more than she should have and kept walking anyway. Luke's hand tightened around the doorknob. "Evenin', miss," he said gently. "Are you lost?" Her lips parted, but the first attempt at speaking failed. She tried again, voice barely stronger than the wind brushing past them. "I ain't got nowhere to go, sir, but I can cook." The words hung between them, fragile as blown glass. A plea wrapped in humility. She stood stiffly, not from the cold alone, but from bracing herself, waiting for rejection. Waiting for the door to close. Luke's chest tightened. He had seen stray dogs with more confidence than this girl. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Eliza," she whispered. "Eliza May Granger. How long you been out in this cold?" "Since mornin', sir." She clasped her hands together, trying to stop the shaking. I'm sorry to bother you. I seen the light in your window. I thought maybe," her voice cracked, "maybe someone kind lived here." Luke looked at her again, really looked. Her thin shoulders were drawn tight, like she was holding herself upright by sheer will. Her hair clung to her skin in damp curls. Frost had formed along the edges of her shawl. She was young, barely 20 if he had to guess, but her face carried an older kind of tiredness. He stepped aside without another thought. "No one should be out alone on Christmas," he said quietly. "Come in before that cold eats you alive." Eliza hesitated, as though unsure she had truly been invited. Then she stepped across the threshold slowly, like a person afraid the floor might disappear beneath her feet. Warmth wrapped around her instantly, and her eyes fluttered shut in relief. The fire crackled in the hearth. The faint scent of stew still lingered from earlier, though Luke hadn't touched it. Shadows danced gently on the log walls, painting the room in soft, amber hues. Part 2, expanded, 700 words. The kitchen slowly filled with warmth again, something it hadn't truly felt in years. Eliza stood near the stove with a quiet confidence Luke hadn't expected from someone who'd been freezing on his porch less than an hour ago. Her fingers moved with careful precision as she chopped onions, stirred stew, and added pinches of herbs from the jars along the shelf. She moved like someone who had learned to work without being told twice, someone who knew the difference between cooking out of duty and cooking because it was the only way to keep the world from swallowing you whole. Luke lingered in the doorway, arms crossed, not wanting to intrude but drawn by the simple comfort of watching another person move through the space that had felt so empty after Anna's passing. The clang of spoons, the gentle bubbling of stew, the soft hum Eliza unconsciously fell into, it stirred something in him he wasn't ready to name. "You sure you're all right standing there so long?" he asked finally, seeing her lean a little too heavily on her right leg. Yes, sir, Luke, she corrected quickly. I'm used to standin' on my feet all day. Hardly notice it anymore. He nodded, though he didn't miss the quiet wince she tried to hide. Whatever she'd endured before arriving at his ranch hadn't been soft or kind. But he let her work, she seemed to find strength in it. When the stew was ready, she ladled it carefully into 2 bowls, setting them on the table with a small, bashful dip of her head. She didn't sit until Luke did, and even then, she perched on the edge of the chair as if prepared to spring up the moment someone decided she didn't belong there. You can eat, he said gently. She hesitated, hands trembling slightly around the spoon. I thought maybe I should wait for you to finish, sir, Luke. That's not how we do things here. She blinked at the word we, like it was too big for her to hold. Tentatively, she lifted a spoonful to her mouth, and when the warmth hit her, she closed her eyes briefly, as though savoring not just the food but the simple fact she was allowed to eat it. Luke didn't interrupt her. He could tell she couldn't remember the last time she'd sat at a table without fear hitching in her throat. They ate quietly for a few minutes before he finally asked, "You wanna tell me what happened?" "Only if you feel like it." Eliza stared down into her bowl, her breathing slow and careful, like someone stepping across thin ice. "I was traveling with a man named Virgil," she said softly. "Met him in Denton, said he had work lined up for me. Housekeeping, cooking, things I'm good at." She exhaled shakily. "My mama always said to follow hope where it shows up. I thought, maybe this was it." Luke already felt anger prickling under his skin. "But once we got on the road," she continued, voice trembling, "things changed. He wanted me to do things. Said I owed him for talking me along. When I said no, he got mean. Meaner the farther we rode." Luke's grip tightened on his fork. "Why didn't you get help in town?" he asked, though gently. "He left me," she whispered. "Left me right where the road splits. Took the horse, the wagon, everything. Said I could freeze or crawl back to Denton and be laughed at for being stupid enough to trust a man like him." She looked up, eyes shining with humiliation that wasn't hers to carry. "I chose to walk. You chose right," Luke said firmly. "You kept going. That counts for a lot." Eliza tried to smile, but it wobbled. "I didn't expect to find a house out here. Thought maybe the lights were just my mind playing tricks. But they were real. You were real." Luke cleared his throat, the weight of her words settling on him heavier than he expected. "What about your folks?" he asked softly. "Anyone waiting for you back home?" She shook her head. "Mama passed 2 years ago. I never knew my daddy. After that, I just went where folks needed hands. But people don't always treat you right when you're young and alone and don't got no one standing behind you." Her voice faded. Part 3, expanded, 700 words. Christmas morning arrived over the Hargrave Ranch like a soft sigh. The sun broke through the low clouds, scattering gold across the snow-dusted plains. Frost clung to every fence post, each blade of winter-hardened grass, and even to the edges of the barn doors. The world outside was cold and sharp, but inside, warmth lingered thick in the air, carrying the scent of pine from the small wreath Luke had hung over the fireplace and the faint traces of last night's stew. Luke expected to wake to the empty, quiet house he had grown accustomed to. Instead, he heard a soft clatter, a gentle hiss of sizzling, sounds that belonged to a kitchen alive with purpose. Frowning, he padded down the stairs in his boots, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and froze at the threshold. Eliza was there, moving deftly between the stove and the counter, hair tied back neatly, sleeves rolled up. Steam curled from a pot of coffee she'd brewed strong, and golden biscuits lined a tray beside sizzling bacon. She hummed softly under her breath, a tune that reminded him faintly of Anna, though lighter, less burdened. Luke's lips curved involuntarily, a warmth blooming in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "Mornin', sir, Luke," she greeted him, turning with a cautious smile. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, as though afraid she had overstepped or interrupted something sacred. "Good morning," he said softly, the words rough around the edges but genuine. "You didn't have to do all this." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, brushing flour from her hands. "Figured I'd make something proper for Christmas breakfast. Hope that's all right." Luke shook his head, stepping fully into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter and studied her for a long moment. She was young, yet there was a resilience about her that went beyond mere survival. The way she had carried herself last night, the careful attentiveness with which she cooked, it all told him she had been hardened by the world, but not broken. "Not yet. Sit down," he finally said, gesturing toward the small table in the corner. Eat before it gets cold. She hesitated, fingers curling around the edge of a chair as though it were a lifeline. I don't want to bother. You're not a bother, Eliza, he interrupted firmly. And you're not a guest in some temporary sense. If you're here, you're here. Her lips parted in surprise, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. No one had said those words to her in a long, long time. She slowly eased herself into the chair, eyes darting to the food, to the steaming coffee, to Luke himself. He noticed how carefully she looked at him, as if measuring whether he could be trusted, whether this was real, not just another cruel trick the world had played on her. As they ate, a quiet rhythm settled over the kitchen. Luke took bites of the biscuits, savoring the buttery warmth, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. The shadows on the walls danced like old friends, the fire's glow reached into corners that had been cold for far too long, and somewhere deep in the ranch, hope took root. When she finally spoke, her voice was hesitant but earnest. Luke, I should be on my way soon. I don't want to overstay my welcome. He shook his head. No, you're not overstaying. You don't have to leave just because the calendar says Christmas Day is over. You can stay as long as you like. Her hands clutched at the edge of the table, uncertainty and longing warring in her expression. I don't got nobody else, Luke. And I ain't never had a place where someone asked what I wanted. That's different now, he said gently. This house, it's been too quiet for too long. It needs life, needs someone who cares enough to make it feel like home. And you've already started doing that. Her eyes shimmered, not just with the faint trace of tears, but with hope, fragile and luminous. She looked down at the plate in front of her, at the coffee warming her fingers, and then back at him. You really mean that? I do, he said, his voice steady. No conditions, no expectations. You stay because you want to, not because you feel you owe me anything. Not because anyone else left you behind. Eliza swallowed hard, blinking back emotions that had been buried under years of fear and loneliness. Slowly, she rose from her chair and stepped toward him, tentative but determined. I'd like to stay, she whispered. If you'll have me. Luke's heart lifted in a way he hadn't known it could. He reached out, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. Then you're home, he said. Outside, the wind swept across the plains, lifting snowflakes into the sunlight like tiny diamonds. Inside, the ranch was alive again. Laughter began to bubble quietly from Eliza, tentative at first, then stronger. Luke found himself chuckling in response, feeling the old warmth that had been missing for years. By noon, the two of them moved about the kitchen together, Luke fetching pans, Eliza seasoning vegetables, both of them laughing quietly when a biscuit tipped over or the coffee boiled a little too long. The house, once hollow and silent, thrummed with life, its walls echoing with sound and warmth. For Luke, the ache of loss had not vanished, nor would it ever fully disappear. But in Eliza, he saw a new chapter beginning, a chance to heal not just himself, but someone else who had been left cold and alone. And for Eliza, the ranch was more than a roof, it was proof that kindness existed, that people could be trusted, that hope could come even on the harshest of plains. That Christmas, the snow continued to fall outside, painting the world in white. Inside, the hearth glowed, the aroma of breakfast lingered, and two hearts, long battered by life, found warmth in each other's presence. It was a beginning neither of them had expected, but it was the kind of beginning that lasts.